The scriptorium at Ohrid had grown into a cathedral of thought. Yanko, once a boy tracing letters in the sand, was now a man whose hands bore the calluses of both the chisel and the quill. He stood beside Bozhidar, who moved slowly now, his spirit still sharp but his body weary. Together they looked over the great registry, a massive volume that recorded the school's reach. The letters were no longer just symbols of sounds. They had become the structural pillars of a rising civilization, holding up the weight of a people's collective memory. The influence of the word had reached the halls of justice. Zora, the daughter of the merchant dragon, stood in her father's counting house, but she was not looking at ledgers of salt or silk. She presented Dragon with a new charter, written in the clear, authoritative Cyrillic script. It was a code of laws, ensuring that the rights of the traveler and the local were etched in ink for all to see. Dragon marveled at how the script had transformed his trade into a legacy of fairness, turning a simple market into a foundation for a stable society. Beyond the mountains, the golden standard traveled north. Predslava, now a seasoned diplomat of the written word, oversaw the loading of a heavy supply train. She handed the final, cloth-wrapped codex to Borislav, a captain of the guard whose duty was to escort the knowledge to the Kievan courts. Predslava knew that these books were more potent than any sword Borislav carried. They were seeds of a shared identity that would bloom in the vast forests and plains of the north, binding distant kin through a common grammar. Yanko returned to his father's trade, but with a new purpose. He spent his days in the courtyard of the monastery, teaching a young apprentice named Vasil how to carve the letters into the very stone of the arches. Yanko explained that while ink could fade and vellum could burn, the word in stone would endure for 1,000 winters. Vasil watched with focus as Yanko struck the chisel, the rhythmic clink-clink echoing the heartbeat of Ohrid, turning the monastery into a living monument that spoke to every pilgrim who passed through its gates. In the sun-drenched fields of the valley, the script became the shield of the humble. Zora traveled to the village of a farmer named Stoyan, carrying a document that defined the borders of his land. For generations, such things were settled by the whims of lords. But now, Stoyan held a piece of parchment that named him and his heritage in his own tongue. As Zora read the words aloud, Stoyan touched the ink as if it were sacred soil, realizing that the alphabet had given him a voice that the powerful could no longer ignore. The bridge to the west remained open, though the traffic had changed. Bozhidar sat in the cool shade of the library with Giles, a scholar who had traveled from the Frankish lands to replace the aging Lambert. They did not debate the superiority of Latin or Slavic. Instead, they worked on a parallel translation of ancient philosophies. Giles admitted that the Cyrillic script possessed a unique clarity for expressing the complexities of the human heart, a bridge that allowed the wisdom of the East to flow back into the older courts of the West. In the northern scriptoria established by the school's graduates, the first generation of native scholars was coming of age. Predslava sat in a bustling room in Kiev, watching a young student named Kiri practice her vowels. Kiri did not remember a time before the alphabet. To her, the letters were as natural as the air she breathed. Predslava realized that this was the true victory. The script was no longer a gift from a distant school, but the birthright of a child who would one day write her own history. Years passed, and the landscape of the region was irrevocably altered. Yanko and Zora met at the summit of a hill overlooking the lake, where a new stone archway marked the boundary of the school's lands. They spoke of how the script had unified the disparate tribes, creating a regional identity that was defined not by blood, but by the shared beauty of their written language. The bridge of letters had become a bridge of souls, crossing the divides of geography and status to form a single, resilient culture. The time came for the elders to pass into the history they had recorded. Yanko sat by the bedside of Bozhidar, whose eyes were dim, but whose voice was a steady whisper. Bozhidar handed Yanko his own worn silver quill, a symbol of the authority of the school. He told Yanko that the work was never truly finished, for every generation must find its own way to speak the truth. As Bozhidar closed his eyes, Yanko felt the weight of the quill. a light object that held the power to shape the future of millions. Now a patriarch of the school, Yanko walked the shores of Lake Ohrid with a young boy named Nestor, the grandson of the child Pitar had once taught. The sun was setting, casting a golden path across the water. Yanko did not need to draw in the sand. Instead, he pointed to the many inscriptions on the walls and gates they passed. He told Nestor that the letters were the breath of their ancestors, a gift that would carry their stories into the horizon of forever. The horizon of Ohrid was no longer a distance to be reached, but a light they carried within.